is Budget and Oversight for the Metro Arts Commission. And I want to welcome everyone. I think somebody said, how do we feel since we had a month off? Because we've not met since May 7th. It's been longer than a month. However, in that month, we've got a lot of things to sort of look at today, some of which we'll probably delve into pretty heavily. Some of it we might have to delay because there's more details coming, I understand, at the commission meeting on some things, and I'll mention those as we get to those on the agenda and see where we go from here. It is now, looks like it's 12:07, 12:08, one of those times. But Vivian actually has the right time. All right. Is there public comment today?
There's no public comment.
All right, thank you so much. All right, well, what we're going to do is delve right into the issues as the, and I'm looking for the agenda that I just had in my hand. Yeah. I have minutes galore.
Same here. Do you have any extra agendas, Vivian?
Oh, I had my hands on it. It's over here somewhere, but the question is, I must have eaten it. It looked good this afternoon. Thanks, Vivian. All right. All right, there's no public comment. What we have is minutes, and I wanted to make sure. We have minutes for April the 10th and May 7th. Had we approved the March meetings?
Correction, you have March 27th as well.
March 27th as well. So there are 3 sets of minutes. Have you all had an opportunity to look those over? As we go through issues on the agenda, and once we get to old business, new business, I want to sort of summarize some things we said we were going to do in prior meetings that probably is still outstanding because we're continually working, revising, and working some more and then revising. What is the, is there a motion to approve minutes by date?
Yes. Each date.
Each date needs to be approved.
Separately, yes, ma'am.
March the 27th, which has everyone had an opportunity to scan those and see if they reasonably look well? Or would you like to delay those and give an opportunity to scan those throughout the meeting and approve them at the end? That also is an option too. Yeah. Okay. Can I get a motion to approve the March 27, 2024 minutes?
I'll move to approve them.
I have a motion. Can I get a second?
Second.
Very good. All in favor? Aye. There are 3 of us, so we'll be looking back and forth. And someone is on their way, I understand?
Nefflin.
Commissioner Nefflin is on his way, we think. Okay, so that's it. The next set of minutes is April 10, 2024.
I'll move to approve.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Jester, second by Commissioner Lefowitz. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And finally, the May 7, 2024 minutes.
Move to approve.
Second.
All right, very good. Thank you so much. Thank you, Vivian.
You're welcome. That won't happen again.
We understand. Sometimes it's more things than we have time to do. All right. We're going to start looking at some issues. I don't think we have FY24 budget closeout, do we?
No, not at
We,
all.
we do not have that. We're going to look at that probably at some point, probably at our next meeting, because what we need to know is where were we, when, as we move forward in this fiscal year. By the way, happy new fiscal year to everybody. Since this is really one of our first meeting this year, to start moving forward on the issues we have to deal with. And one of those is going to be looking at the closeout. Where are we? What did we spend? Where did we spend it? Are there some areas for us as oversight and budget to look for improvements, or look for questions that may need answers that are not in there? And I think that's some of the things that we're going to have to consistently look at as we go through our process over the next several months. We're an ad hoc committee. We don't know how long our life is, but one thing is for sure, we need to come out with clarity on our goals, our objectives, as well as those of other committees, so that we can start looking at SOPs, which traditionally are done by or in concert with staff, and that's real critical. There are SOPs that exist in certain areas, and we need to clarify where they are to look at those and codify those, and sort of look at a system for making sure that they are on some form, on a place where they can be found rather easily. And then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Coleman to talk about the FY25 budget, which we've just gotten a copy of. Chris is not with us today, but Dr. Coleman is here. And then we're going to talk about the audit. We've got old business and new business, and under that, we're probably going to talk about the MHRC issues briefly, since that's where I think that could fall, because we've talked about that before, and see where we are, and then do Q&A and sort of try to lay out a schedule. Those are my goals for the day, a schedule for the next several months, which means we may be having monthly meetings if the body agrees to that. So, all right. Dr. Coleman.
Thank you very much. With regard to FY24 closeout, we have not begun that process. We have been working very diligently on closing out, particularly our grants with the Tennessee Arts Commission. And I am pleased to report that we did receive a letter from Carol White that those Artsville Community and Major Cultural Institution grants were approved, and the closeout was final. We got a lot of assistance from Tennessee Arts Commission and a lot of assistance from finance, particularly Amanda Deaton Moyer and others, Mary Jo and some others. What was revealing to me is I didn't quite understand why it wasn't more routine to close out the contracts. And what I discovered, and Tessa was also very, very instrumental, and perhaps she could add, in some instances there were not appropriate contracts signed and on record for the grants that were awarded. There were also missing information in terms of what was charged to the various contracts. And the reason I wanted to focus on that is how can we prevent that in the future? The bottom line is we are not receiving any funds from Tennessee Arts Commission, and they took very seriously the findings of the internal audit, and they have asked us to give a report to them on October 1st of our progress toward responding to those particular audit findings. I don't really have anything more to say about that. With regard to the grants that we make, we were passed through for Tennessee Arts Commission. Again, a good deal of work from an incredible team of people. And Sydney was our point person. And then when Chris was back, she was also involved to some degree. We have paid almost all, if not all, of the grantees for FY24. I think there may be one or two Thrive recipients still remaining outstanding. But again, that was a really challenging process for reasons of, again, not good documentation, lack of clarity about reporting requirements and the monitoring. So I think we have a lot of lessons learned. And since Tess is here and Amanda is here, they were the key people in legal and finance who were helping us and raised many of the questions for which people had to find answers. I didn't know if you wanted to comment or say anything, and particularly in terms of lessons learned and how we move forward more effectively.
Yeah, so I'll speak from the legal aspect. To Dr. Coleman's point, we're helping implement some process improvements regarding contracting of all grants to organizations. Regarding the APCIY grants, there was an agreement in place. It wasn't what legal would consider a standard contract document. And so to close out those grants and effectuate the second payment, we were able to put a more formalized contract in place. That's routing. And so going forward, Dr. Coleman, legal, finance, and arts, we're going to work together on continuing these process improvements for distribution of grant funds going forward. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions about the process from the legal aspect.
How long do you anticipate the contract process, approval process to take place?
Overall, or specifically for the APCIY grants?
With the grants you're talking about?
Those grants are actually routing in DocuSign right now for signatures. There's only 4 of them. They're in various processes. Some of them are with the grantees for signatures, and then some of them have been elevated to Metro staff. So once they're signed by all pertinent Metro departments, they'll be filed with the clerk and be a valid contract.
And at some point, I think we just need to have an understanding of how that approval process works as a committee, so we're clear. So if we see something that is not moving, or we hear something, we'll know what it is, as opposed to waiting until it pops up in another place.
I think the important takeaway is that Metro has standard terms of contracts that are in place for liability reasons, and ideally any funds going out of Metro Arts should include those terms. Obviously, depending on the nature of the grant requirements, terms can be added, but just ensuring that we do have the standard contract with the standard terms, which those terms are derived from Metro Code and state law, and that the funds going out are, backed by those contractual obligations.
Are there any standard reporting obligations in the contract, or is that set up operational outside of the contract?
So the reporting requirements, I usually defer to the art staff, specifically Ms. Davis, as far as whether it's a pass-through grant or a Metro-derived grant, regarding what she envisions or arts envisions for reporting requirements. Those, I believe, are fairly standardized, but I don't want to speak to something that I'm not the subject matter expert on.
Okay. I'm just trying to figure out where things are, and if it's in the contract, it takes on a different level. If it's inside, it's operational, so it can be done at the discretion of the director, interim director, and move forward, or the board's request. That's how that works.
Yeah, so I collaborate with arts when putting together these contracts, regarding reporting requirements, dates, timelines, any additional terms that might be needed.
Thank you.
I wanted to know, Amanda, from finance, since you were really the prime mover on a lot of this and most of this, any?
One thing is we receive these MCI and ABC grants from the state earlier in the fiscal year. And one thing, and there is a system, and the state has a system that we can use. And so we were at the last minute revising that budget and putting acceptable costs in so that we could be reimbursed for those. And in the future, when we get such a grant, and I do believe we will be successful in meeting some of these audit requirements and getting back on track there. So I'm very hopeful. We can do that throughout the year. And so it doesn't become an end of year push. Ultimately, we ended up getting a full reimbursement. It was a match, 100% match. So we paid half, they paid half, and it was good. So I think as part of those, specifically the MCI grant, that's something we can do on the other end, and we can and it's very, the burden for reporting is low, in that it's an operating grant, so we have to say what we did this year, but that's a good thing. So that the burden is low, and I think and Sydney put it all into the system. She did a good job. And the documentation at the late date was not the easiest, but it wouldn't be that way if we did it along the way. So that's an option. As for the ABC grants, we are pass through, and so it was just, and the state gave us a ton of help to make sure that we were signing off and all the T's were crossed and the I's were dotted. And I expect in the future that they would look to us to cross those T's and dot those I's in the flux system. So I think that's an area where we can look to improve. But as far as the financial process, the team worked together, got those things through, maybe not as timely as the state would have liked, but we got it done. And I think it's been a really good learning. And I think we're taking steps to make that a reality for all of our processes.
Thank you. Anything else?
Well, I mean, for me, what's important is that that Metro Arts has a clear understanding of all of the processes. And what I've discovered is not much is documented. There isn't I've not seen, there may exist somewhere a desk manual or operating procedures manual that details the processes, and I think that would be a very good outcome.
Oh, that is our outcome, Director.
of this process, and even for whoever the new director is, because even though I was going through the process, it was responding to crisis or responding to things that were not there, that you, as Amanda so well put, you had to go backwards in order to get forward or where you needed to be. And that has to do with record keeping, that has to do with understanding processes, and that has to do with commitment to being compliant with the rules that do exist, because they do exist. So,
if I may, in the concept of those two particular grants, we did get them, and the grants actually specify what has to be done. And I think you're right. It's a matter of getting them, keeping them on file, referencing them regularly, and asking for help from the state, because they have those trainings and they have those documentations, and doing it on a regular basis. I mean, those particular grants were actually approved by council, as all grants must be. And so they're on record with our system, the Royal Hour, all of our system. And so it is in place, but it's really operationalizing those documents.
Yes, Commissioner.
I don't know who this question is for, but I guess I'm wondering, to your point, Dr. Coleman, about standard operating procedures. Are there any standard operating procedures that already exist within Metro that would be helpful as we look to, do you know what I'm saying?
Sure. Finance has a number of published operating procedures, certainly as it relates to our R12, our year end, even how to get a grant through council, and how to and how to make sure we close out grants, so that whether they need to be accrued or otherwise. But as for what we do operationally, most of the time that's guided by the grant, and that's what we look to the department to interact with their grantor, in this case TAC. So there's certainly assistance, and it is written. And there's also just a wonderful group of folks on the grant side that want to help from finance as well as the state, that if we get started, they can lend some thoughts and some documentation.
Let me just sort of chime in here because I work for the state. I also work for the feds. So I used to know a whole lot of budgeting and operational procedures. I think there are some. I think there's some that we need to finalize. We'll have to do ourselves because there's some work that is only going to be done by Arts Commission. And so therein lies, I think, the issues, and therein lies the reason we exist. It's those issues where grants and other things exist. They tend to tell you what to do. You got to report on this day, you got to do this, you got to do that. That's the easy part because that can be replicated. It really is the part of how will we define the criteria for Thrive grants. I'm sorry, that really is that's the mountain we have to climb. Now that's not ours, that's Commissioner Jester's committee, but we're all involved in it as commissioners, is what should that look like and where can we find that? But grants, grants issues are out there, and so we can probably get those from the published grants as well. It's a matter of what do we need to do around those particular grants that we really do need to look at in more detail, because that seems to be that's the genesis of our existence, and continues to do that in terms of people's beliefs and trust in what the organization can and will do, and what timelines we'll do it under. And we're under the gun and under the light, I think, for those kinds of questions and issues to come to us in a different light from the last 6 months. Some people think we're finished. We're not. We're just beginning. And so I think that really is the sort of the good news here. We're really just beginning. We've done a lot of talking. We've identified a lot of things, but now we need to probably put some things in place in earnest. What things do we currently have? What things don't we have? And that's it. I talked to Dr. Coleman, I guess about 3 weeks ago, about what we have. I think our public arts process is probably one of the most robust, and probably something that we need to look at and hear from staff about, so we can go on and put that in place and make it the part of the standard operating procedures manual as the folks. So low-hanging fruit is good. Out of the low-hanging fruit might come some insights for the fruit that doesn't appear to be as low as it currently is. So I think that really is our challenge. Reinventing the wheel is an interesting thing because I don't think we're reinventing it. I think we're just adjusting it to fit whatever vehicle we're driving, meaning whatever process or program that we're driving, as opposed to reinventing the thing from scratch, because I think it already exists there. So, Dr. Coleman, I'm going to turn it back to you. Any other things you need?
No, I didn't know if there were any questions. As we attempt to define what the rollout will be for FY25, all of these things will be taken into consideration. And I just had Sydney come in because I wanted to publicly acknowledge the incredible work that she did and assisting in getting the work done and answering many, many questions from Amanda and Carol and Shannon and people at Tennessee Arts Commission, and also Tessa. So thank you very much for that. The next thing I wanted to go over is...
Before we move on, you've got an October 1 date for Tennessee Arts Commission.
Yes.
What do they want from you? And as budget and oversight, how can we assist and review what you need to do so that we can get some approval from commission, so that we can codify this as we go along, as opposed to going backwards? So,
Thank you for that. The plan right now is on Thursday, the internal audit will be hopefully approved of the recommendations. We will accept or reject. Once those are accepted and rejected, I have already begun work on how to perhaps implement them. That is not a full process, but I didn't think I could just wait until the Thursday since I know we have to do it. I am expecting that the plan will come to budget and oversight, and we will be the ones working on the plan. And there are already, as you said, low-hanging fruit type things that are already done, particularly as relates to staff members being vendors and not having gone through the appropriate procurement process, and there are basically several main categories. So we've categorized them and attempted to prioritize them. Whenever we next meet again, would have a written plan and get it to you in advance so that you could review and make comments on it. If we're meeting in August, then we have September, so by September to be able to present. They didn't say anything more specific than progress, and we can get back with them to get progress defined so that we're not miscommunicating.
What's their next grant date? I think that's the other thing, because we missed this grant period. So when would be, because this is about Tennessee Arts Commission. So when are they looking for grants proposals to come forward so that we know what kind of, so October 1st, they want to know what we're doing about internal audit. Well, what's the next date that something could happen where we might have the opportunity to apply for the grant?
Well, I'm not certain what that
Okay.
date is. Sydney, do you know?
Apologies. According to, for ABC at least, their deadline was 7/1 of 24. So I would assume that it would be like July of 26, for lack of better words. Almost a full fiscal year before we could probably, because the application opens in April, and then
So we've missed that date.
Yes.
yes, ma'am.
Okay.
We missed any state money this fiscal year.
This fiscal year.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
for
for next
25.
fiscal year, April would be the first date then to it.
This is just a rough guesstimate based on the dates that they
Okay.
had for this year. But like for this year, the application opened for April 8th. So I would assume that it would be generally around the same time
Okay.
for the next cycle.
And that's what I was looking for. Just what does that look like in terms of,
Essentially, we would need to start preparing, I would say, this coming spring
Okay.
so that we could be better, better prepared for the next time.
that sounds good. Thanks.
And related to that is in discussions with audit, because my question was, well, is there a timeline by which we have to have implemented all of the suggestions? And they said no, and they said typically it takes 9 to 12 months. That's what most organizations do. And if you're making progress, that's fine. And if you have run into some problems, they said that they are very flexible about extending the deadlines and dates. As I recall, I think they come back in 2 years to check and to make sure that we are in compliance.
All right. As someone who's gone through many an audit, they're like children. You don't want them to get too far without holding their hands and putting some conditions around it, which means plans, dates, and those kind of things. I think are the kinds of things that audit will look for. And like I said, I've been through many. There's been the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good ones you don't have to worry about. Generally, nobody ever tells you you're doing good. They only tell you when you're doing bad. That's my own personal experience. So, but if you have plans and action items, those are the things that they're looking to see. So, are there any other questions for Dr. Coleman? Because I can roll on and on, but I want
Dr. Coleman, with the 2-year date, would that be from the time that they started the last audit, or from the time that the suggestions? When would that?
As I understand it, it's from the last audit. I don't know that it is for, but I will check that to be sure. That was my understanding from Lauren and the gentleman who accompanied her, Walter Williams, I believe.
And is that this past in the last 6 months?
So it'd be June is when it was released. June 25th, it was released to the public.
Fine. So that's using the
Yeah, because it had not even gone to their no, it was released June 12th, and June 25th it went to their internal audit committee.
Got it. Okay. Did I see your hand, Commissioner? No. Okay. Fine. All right. The risk rankings are in the appendix for the audit, or Appendix B. And this is going to be the Bible by which we function and operate. Those are the items that we'll have to agree or disagree with moving forward, or put together plans for. Those are the items as I understand them. And I think I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page moving forward. A lot of verbiage is in the front of that, and that's the documentation supporting those items. But it is this and these items that we're looking at where we need to come out with SOPs, responses, plans of actions, et cetera, to get ourselves moving forward. And we'll get more, the auditors are going to talk on Thursday. I'm not going to talk about them in particular, but I think we probably as a committee might want to make sure that we're familiar, so we might be able to raise certain procedural questions for ourselves and for staff as we look at this moving forward, so that we're clear about where we have to go. And I've got a boomerang question, but I'll save it for old business to new business.
I'm sorry.
Commissioner Watts, did you say Appendix B?
Yes.
Thank you.
Appendix B. There are items A through, and some of them have multiple parts.
Yeah.
Page 24.
Yeah, and it's through M. And then on page 31, there's some risk rankings there, and that's audit language for what's at risk. And the higher the risk, the more we need to cure, the quicker we need to cure it if we can, or at least have a real serious plan for getting those taken care of. And some of it deals with, and that's an interesting piece. Let me stop there, because that the high risk, public trust and perception is one of those issues at high risk. And so I think we need to always be aware of that. And then the other, though, is internal controls, missing and inadequate key internal controls. That's where the standard operating procedures should be in place. That's how often are we looking internally. Have we found it? Have we corrected it? And that's that really is the function for those standard operating procedures. And then non-compliance with applicable federal, state, and local laws or Metro Nashville government policies. Those are the things that we need to sort of look for. Then there's the medium, where there's some controls, and then there is low, where there is in place but not consistent and not effective. Meaning we have things in place, so some of that might mean just getting people to monitor, evaluate those on a more consistent basis. So some of this is like eating an elephant. How do you eat it? One bite at a time. And there are a lot of elephants that we might be biting. I think it's doable if we look at it in terms of whether it's the trunk, the ear, or the tail, and sort of deal with that. And if it's already in place as part of the body, take those, highlight those, and celebrate that they're there, and just make sure we're doing consistent kinds of things, because I think that really is what happens. Sometimes we look at it and go, how are we going to eat this elephant? It's doable, because I think we have more in place than we think in some places. Okay.
Yeah,
and I haven't seen it, so I'm just guessing.
I would just say, in terms of my observations, and today marks I came May 16th, so today is July 16th. So
happy anniversary.
2 months, and I'm still surviving and smiling. I think there needs to be a commitment across the organization to comply with existing rules and regulations, Metro, et cetera. Then we need to set in place systems for monitoring and ensuring that we are complying. So, for example, we are supposed to have an annual report. We haven't had one since 2020. We're supposed to have, council is supposed to approve the grant criteria. That hasn't happened in a little while. So things like that, as Commissioner Watts said, some things do exist, and where they're absent, we need to create them.
Any more questions about the audit? Like I said, I was not going to go into a lot of detail, but if there's a question or an issue that you think is burning, we might not have the answer, but just to put it on the record to make sure that it is answered on Thursday, or at least somebody's working on it Thursday to get us an answer if they can, if it can't be answered today. Dr. Coleman, thank you for providing us with these details. Are there any more questions or issues that we did not raise at any point on any of the issues? FY24 budget is coming, so that's something that's there. We'll have to deal with that when we get it. I had one question though, and that was on the FY25. There's $352,600 for management consulting services. Do we know what will that entail moving forward?
What we can say is it won't be outside people doing the work that's required in our organization. That was a budget that was put together before any of us got here. And one of the things we are looking at in terms of whenever we do our true up entertainment is whether money from that category can go into, as they say, above the line. So right now we will be doing some things that may require consultancies, but we're really trying to utilize the gifts and talents of our staff. And one of the things that the staff has said is that they were not involved in many things. So, for example, at the executive committee, we talked about the importance of getting the executive director search underway. So we've already asked staff to come up with a document that is a position description. I don't know if it will be used, but at least they'll have the opportunity and we can submit it to HR to be included in the process. We have not talked with Shannon Hall about what is required for such a search, but we are going to get that underway, and we'll also make a recommendation that if there is a possibility to include at least one staff member in that committee that's reviewing.
Okay. And then there's $56,400 for temporary services.
We have no plans at this moment to hire people temporarily, but the issue may come to the fore in this, and when we do, we will do it the right way. We will not have a third-party payee with somebody being there for 2 years. But for example, we no longer have a part-time social media person, and we had a very intensive period from now till August and beyond. And we were trying to see if, given the time, could we get somebody temporarily, but our communications manager has taken on those responsibilities at this time.
Okay.
So,
and then
we had no current plans for any of this until we got the budget approved. The budget is now approved, and we can look at it.
Okay.
The other thing that is, I'm not sure and I'm not seeing, was that we were approved for, I think it was $200,000 for a research, a disparity study, and I'm not seeing that on here. Yeah, and so I have to ask about that.
Yeah,
because it was approved. Initially, it was a $400,000 request, and then it got whittled down, and it was ultimately $215,000. I thought, I'm not sure, but I don't see it on the budget, so I gotta.
And my question would be: is it part of management consulting service? Because that's how that rolls. If not, is it someplace else and not in there?
The thing of it is that was a special. I'm gonna say a restricted, in terms of for a disparity study. And whether or not we move forward with that is open. I think we have a greater need for examples of excellence in grant making, and we're going to work with the Tennessee Arts Commission because they do have a system. They use another platform, Flux. We use Submittable. Submittable works in some instances, but once you put something in as a reminder, like what happened yesterday, I didn't remember to cancel it, and so it created a little bit of concern.
Okay.
So the answer to your question, we have no plans at this moment, and that may be something that the new executive director or the permanent executive director will look at, and we're just happy to have those categories, and we certainly will not be spending more. I think last year was like 900 something thousand for that, and so we will certainly stay within budget. I don't know if that is reassuring or if that answers your question.
Yeah. And I guess I'm going to ask this of Amanda. To the extent there are things on this budget where we may or may not, meaning we've looked at it, may or may not need, is there room for adjustments?
So, thank you for the question. Yes is the answer. So we are meeting, that is, finance is meeting with staff and Dr. Coleman, I think this Friday, to talk about what we call the true-up process. That's not common across every organization, but because the budget is submitted in February, we allow a process by which we do have to move things around within the line items. Don't get too excited. Money doesn't go up.
Right.
And so, for example, if there is there's something where we want to take it out of management services and into another line item, out of temporary services into something, whatever it is, we just talk about. And so we're going to meet on Friday to talk about those items and where things need to be aligned with some of the priorities that you all have identified, some of those that Dr. Coleman just talked about now. So yes, there is an opportunity for that. The window is small, but I think we're going to hit it, and we'll move from there.
Now, one other thing that's important is the grants budget is not reflected here.
Okay.
And so that's something we need to also take a look at. And it was 2-point-something million, I forgot.
3.247.
Oh, thank you.
You just had it on the tip of your tongue. Good deal. All right.
And so we need to be much more careful, much more detailed, and make no promises with regard to how that money will be. And that's going to be a big process, and it's going to take more than just kind of a superficial look and superficial application.
Okay. As they say, the detail is always what's critical for most of this. And that's kind of why I wanted to sort of lift up some of these questions, because these are the questions I think that are in the gray area for a lot of people, me included, in terms of what will or will not happen, or what are the possibilities or options for things to happen. I think that's all we're trying to look at here. So.
Can I ask a question? When is the grants committee, Commissioner Jester? What's going on?
I have been rather hesitant to schedule that, given everything with the audit and with trying to close out fiscal year 24. So there's not currently a date scheduled. We are very aware that there needs to be one soon. Almost not sure what exactly needs to be discussed until several other layers of complexity are sorted out to some degree. So I think Dr. Coleman and I need to have some more in-depth conversation about that. One needs to happen quickly, but there's a lot going on before we can start talking about new money too. So
I just wanted to say that I had put a lot of things on the table, and including not issuing any grants this year, and that kind of went over like a lead balloon, and I got all kinds of reactions from nuclear to the council will be up in arms. But that was just something we do need to look at our process differently. And then we also have, again, the conciliated agreement has specifics about Thrive. We know that it will not be under us specifically, but there in the agreement is that Metro, Arts, MHRC, Legal, Finance will work to keep alive the sentiment. So there's no other metro agency that can take it. So where does it go and how does it go?
Well, that's more interesting than I thought. And therein lies the dilemma. What do people mean by look at it differently? And I'm serious about this because we keep talking about look at it differently. I just heard you say there's a lot to do. And what I need to have somebody do is peel this onion back for me because I know what's been implied, but I don't have any direct kind of information. And you all know that I've been an investigator for 40 years. So I'm looking for the bottom line that says, you got to do this, 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 and this. But I don't know that it's there unless I just haven't heard it. Let me just be honest.
First thing is Metro cannot give grants to individuals.
Okay.
That's the first thing. Okay. And one of the retorts you will hear, well, you've done it for 10 years since 2014. And my answer is the fact that we've done it and sort of stretched, if not illegally done it, is no excuse for continuing. And now that we know, we have an obligation and a responsibility to correct that.
Okay.
Okay. The second thing is if it is illegal for a metro entity to give money to individuals, how do we get the money to individuals? Keeping that commitment. Currently, they can get up to $20,000. Currently, artists were getting multiple grants. Currently, some of the artists who got grants were also on review panels. So we have to be very mindful of things like conflicts of interest. And I would like to recommend that you apply for one grant and you get only one grant. Because if the intent is to serve a variety of people, then you can't do it if you're concentrating the grant awards to a small number.
Let me ask a question then. So the individual artists, you're recommending that they get one grant. Mm-hmm. Is there anybody else in arts getting more than one grant that come and make requests to arts? Is there anybody in any other kind of entity that gets more than one grant?
In arts or just in Metro generally?
In arts, we're talking about arts.
Well, in our operating grants, organizations typically don't get but one grant. Can you shed any light on that?
Are you asking about whether it's happening in our organization or whether it
I'm
happens
asking,
in other organizations?
I'm asking
across
simple.
the
This is
country?
a simple question. This is just a simple question. I'm pretty simple and basic sometimes. I'm asking if somebody shows up at the door,
Mm-hmm.
can they get more than one grant? And if so, who are they? From arts. That's really the question.
Yes, we had some artists who did get more than one grant.
Artists got more than
They
one
did.
grant. Was there any other entity that got any of the organizations, or that they just get operating grants and that's it?
Some people who were in organizations that got operating grants may have gotten individual grants. And Sydney, you can speak to.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of a multifaceted answer and question here. So there were some individuals that, yes, an organization could have received one organizational grant, but then maybe their lead artist also was able to apply and get multiple Thrive or a singular Thrive. So while the organization itself only received, X amount of dollars from us, there was still a way that organization still could have received more dollars because they had a lead artist or they had another artist that was underneath. I mean, just off
You
of
had teams.
Yeah, you had groups of people that might have been working as the sake of an individual artist, but then they were still kind of partnershiping up with other individuals and organizations. After a while, it started to get where the roots would intertwine with each other, and you couldn't really tell who was involved and who wasn't. In some cases, not all, but in some cases. There's one that comes off to the top of my head. An individual received almost 3 Thrive grants that totaled $50,000+ because she was an applying person for one of the orgs, but then also she was the recipient of all 3 checks. So I mean, there's just a lot of different. And then when you think of the guidelines from last year, it also was opened up that organizations could also apply for Thrive if they didn't necessarily fall under the guidelines of an operating grant.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah.
And that helps with clarity, because we've talked around some of these, and I'm sort of looking for the detail, because we can't fix it unless we know what 2 + 2 equals. And so it exists, but not in just some numbers, but not large numbers. Is that what I hear you saying?
Well, I mean, I don't know what you assume. I'm not sure what you're saying is large, but I mean there were
for numbers of one person getting numbers of grants. They could have gotten $20,000, but they got 3 grants. Dr. Coleman just mentioned limited to 1 grant or something. So so that's really what I'm talking about. The amount of dollars don't bother me if they were done and consistent with whatever principles were in place, good, bad, or ugly. Okay. So, all right. And I think finally I have one other question, and that's for you and maybe Sydney, is if you all are looking around the country, and perhaps Commissioner Jester, where do they do it well? And where do they have equity and equitable processes, or do you know that?
So I actually love this question because it kind of shows where Nashville stalls out on equitable work when it comes to art. Austin is a really big comparable. San Diego, Detroit, Atlanta, those are some of the names that come to mind. For sure, Austin. But the key difference in Austin and Nashville is the fact that their funding comes from a completely different place. And this is not the right terms, but those funds come from like private taxing that their city does. Hotel, motel taxes, where they're not under the same level of scrutiny and guidelines of that of like a municipal budget. So that is why and I've actually spoken to a bunch of the people down there. They do some really good work. They said that they also went through their own kind of trials and tribulations when they were trying to affect equity within their funding models. They just maybe weren't as televised as ours and media driven as ours, but at the same time, their funding is coming from a completely different place. So unfortunately, it is like in apples and oranges. We can like watch and see what they're doing, but until we figure out a way to either change the system that we have or work within the one that we have, it's going to be a big overhaul just working within this budget.
Just an observation.
Yeah, but they do it well. I mean, even one of the highlights, they were explaining to me that they pay their panelists almost $1,000 a piece for training, for coming back and just working again. Now I don't know when we'll get the budget to do that, but they are making some really good strides in terms of equity work and making sure that they have like a real diverse group of people that they're giving that funding to. So.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yes. And Tessa, were you first? And then Commissioner.
I just and I don't want to cut against Sydney's comments, but when we're framing the discussion around Thrive and we keep saying individuals, I think it's important to note that these individuals applied for projects. They had specific projects they applied for. So when legal and finance started looking at these what appear to be names getting multiple grants, it's because they might sit on an organization, multiple organizations who are doing multiple projects. And it's my understanding that the applications were not reviewed to the individual, right? We keep saying the individuals were paid, but the applications were reviewed in light of a project. So if one individual works with multiple organizations and they were a subject matter expert and submittable, and so they took the lead on getting funding for their projects. That is how I understand this idea of a single person getting multiple grants. And so I do want to make note of that because I think it's an important part in reviewing future processes.
Okay, sounds great. It gets lighter every day. Commissioner.
I don't know if you know this, Sydney, but I'm thinking about the just as we keep researching comparable cities and is it easier to pay individual art? I mean, I know it's difficult to find ways to pay individuals. Is it easier if that money is that kind of other money you're talking about, like not the municipal budget? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, I guess the best way to answer that is the way that it is structured now, we do not have the ability to do that. So there's a multitude of different other answers to that if we weren't within the system that we have, but we are. So the question is, reasonably, anyone could do anything with external money, if it's not the cities to determine. So it's just kind of one of those questions. It's how do we get the money that we have into a place where we can, distribute it in the way that we're wanting.
Tessa.
I don't want to compare apples with oranges, but so Metro Arts Public Art is paid for essentially through construction bonds, things of that nature, and that is codified in the Metro Code. That is what that money goes for. It's earmarked for that. It can only go to that. But that process specifically, goes through procurement, right? And so I'm not answering your question, but it's still, even if it were to be codified for a specific pot of money to go to a specific thing, for at least from my legal aspect, we're still bumping up against whether money to individuals goes through a true procurement process, whether we're trying to give grants to individuals. To your point, Commissioner.
What were those cities again? Austin, San Diego, Detroit, and
Atlanta.
Atlanta.
LA does some good work too, but they're also, in terms of size, I don't know if we could use them as like a true comparable, but they do LA as well.
Austin is probably the most comparable city.
They are, and
they're also in sort of the same business we are, and it's called music.
yeah, and they have their arts community is super strong,
Oh, yeah,
and
they are.
and they go through a lot of community engagement as well. But I mean, I've spoke to a few members on that team, and they were saying that they found themselves in somewhat of a similar situation and just trying to figure out what their funding models and what that was going to look like.
Just as an aside, how large is their arts commission in terms of staffing and budget?
Oh, I don't remember the commission, but I know that their staffing is. I think it's pretty similar. I think it's
Okay.
under 20.
Okay.
I think it's pretty comparable.
I visited there, but it was several years ago. and
Okay. I mean, it's always good to look at apples and apples, even though their funding cycle might be different, but in terms of size and what they're doing in terms of projects, and then you can break out the dollars.
See, they
and where
also
they're
have
coming from.
they also have a multitude of different funding models as well. So they have annual, they have rolling applications, they have. I mean, they pretty much have all different types of forms of granting and funding options at any given time. And so, funny enough, they even have their own Thrive program. It's obviously not anything like ours, but they have multiple different programs happening at the exact same time that are on different scheduling systems and processes. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Austin. Mm-hmm. Because I think the more we can learn from other places that have some things that are similar, the better off we are. Again, we're not reinventing wheels, we're adjusting wheels to fit our cars, trucks, and or whatever else we might be driving. We hope we're not doing horse and buggies. All right. As we look at our charge moving forward, some of the questions I raised was really about where there's some options for us to, again, look at places and things, and again, how we might be able to help. I'm just looking for, kick my brain into speed for what might be happening. Any other questions on budget or audit for Dr. Coleman? If not, we're going to move on to, or any questions in general that we might need to have that might guide us in our upcoming work. If not, old business, which has now become new business, the MHRC complaint. Are we clear on what that is or is not? Do we need, in terms of moving forward? You mentioned it. Are we clear about what that means for us, or are we still looking for adjustments, agreements, definition moving forward?
Well, moving forward, there is a document called the Conciliated Agreement, which I think everybody received, the commissioners received copies of. That has been approved by MHRC. We will take action on it on Thursday. And then does Metro have to sign on, Tessa?
I'm not sure. I can't answer that.
It was since there are three parties and three lawyers, it's MHRC, Arts, and Metro. And so those are the three lawyers that have been working on finalizing, because what we have, the document that you have, is an agreement in principle. And by July 31st, there's supposed to be something more specific. And Ashley is here from MHRC, and if you want to add on.
I think
Probably need to get near.
Yeah, I think what Dr. Coleman just said is right. So it's an agreement in principle. I think it's about 9 bullet point length sentences. Some of them have been mentioned here already. It sounds like, commissioners, you all have seen a copy of that, hopefully. So it's an agreement in principle that the participants, which are Metro Arts, MHRC, Metro Legal, and the Title VI complainants, agree to in principle. Once there is a signal that there's agreement in principle, it will be papered out. It will be finalized by July 31st, which will include details, benchmarks, definitions where needed, and that sort of thing. And that part will be handled by the respective 3 attorneys for each group. And so, like you said, MHRC has approved it. I'm under the impression that Metro Legal has approved it in principle as well, and the complainants have as well. So if you all choose to approve it in principle, then we keep moving forward to the full resolution of the Title VI complaint.
Where does principle stop and action start? And what does it look like?
When you say what does it look like,
Yeah.
do you want me to give an example from it?
I would like that.
Sure. So I think the most tangible thing, for example, from the agreement is authorization to pay 26 public art, the majority of which are mural projects, as well as the dual awardees, those applications where there were some eligibility for both the Thrive Award and general operating grants from last year. So there's 13 of those general operating. So, for example, if there is agreement in principle for those additional grants and awards, then papering it out will be, letters of agreement or contracts will be drawn up by X date. They will be sent out by this date. The terms for spending and reporting will be these dates. And so just sort of fleshing out those details. That's the most sort of concrete thing from the 8 or 9 points in the agreement.
And to what you said previously, Ashley, was that the hashing out of the benchmarks and things like that will happen once it's approved, and that will give us idea, that will help us decide next steps, right? Is that right?
Yeah, I think that the details are being delegated to the attorneys for each group. And so I know myself, I'm not going to be the one sort of papering out those details. That's sort of delegated to our legal counsel. And my understanding is Attorney Yarborough for you all and Attorney Roberts Turner for legal.
I'm under the impression that on the 18th when we meet, if we as a commission agree to these conciliation details in principle, not in principle, in principle, then that would be when we would move forward with greater detail under each of those bullet points, yeah.
Okay. I just want it on the record, on these records, because every once in a while we make the assumption, I'm playing the advocate today for detail. Because every once in a while we talk about things and it happens in an MHRC meeting, but it doesn't come back to Arts Commission to understand what it is that's going to happen moving forward. And we don't have any records of that. Yeah. As we're looking at process and oversight, I think that's really what we have to sort of deal with and sort of put into place here. even if we agree, we have to say we agree.
Sure. I know it made communication about what went on in conciliation a bit more difficult, but in the spirit of everybody being able to speak freely and bring up concerns that might have been might have caused contempt or vitriol outside of the room, there was a confidentiality agreement signed. So that's why nothing has really come back to us until it's been agreed upon in principle. And I imagine if for some reason it's not agreed upon in principle by all parties, everything that gets us to the next set of agreements in principle would be confidential as well. But that's why it hasn't been communicated as openly as maybe would have been easy. Yeah.
I know the conciliation process. I've done 40 years of them. And generally, I think what compounds it is there's so many external organizations to arts working on this, which creates the issues that we're talking about, because that really is why we all have to agree and or move forward on our parts to get those approved. So I get that.
Well, like you, I was just making sure it was on public record. I know that you understand.
Yeah, got it. Good deal. Yes,
Commissioner Watts, I do want to know that obviously Ms. Yarborough is the attorney for the commission, and I'm sure she's more than happy to answer any specific questions that this committee has. And obviously Ashley is speaking in generalities because she's been involved in the process, but that Tyler would be the best source of questions or information on the commission's behalf.
And she is available and will be at the commission meeting on Thursday.
wonderful. All right, great. And I also want to make sure that we're as transparent as possible in this process. Their role, our role, those roles, and whether they are direct or indirect, that we understand those, because it impacts our ability to do what it is we need to do as an organization moving forward. So those are the kinds of things too I think we have to sort of deal with, because everybody assumes because A did it, B is going to do it, or because A said, B says, and sometimes they're slightly different. Does not mean they're in conflict with each other, but we just need to be transparent about what it is we are doing and how we're doing it. So, all right. Thanks, Ashley. We appreciate you as usual. No. We're doing a whole lot of clarification today so we can sort of move forward. All right, this then gets to the heart and the core of what we need to do as new business moving forward. I'd like to hear from the two commissioners here about where you think we need to go as a body, what we can do over the next 60 days. And I noticed that at some point, we're already stuck with a date of October 1 on some things that we need to do. So just what we need to do, or what we think we need in terms of information to do it, so that we can be clear and make those requests as quickly as possible.
I think my biggest concerns would be around budgetary oversight, so we make sure we never end up where we were last year with the budget. And that would mean, if we are meeting monthly, to have just a monthly report of where we are financially. Right, but that's the first time I've seen something really like that in detail that made sense, and I'm a financial guy. So continue to have that, I think, would be a request. And then as we begin working on bringing together operational procedures and just a lot of the information that seems to not be existent in terms of running an organization, that we just have the opportunity to look over that and understand it, and not necessarily approve it or disapprove it, but just know what's going on and have some say in watching over everything that's built.
I think whatever, in terms of budget, to your point too, that whatever we can give to the commission as a whole, I think this is just me. I would like to see more of that, like monthly or whenever we have a commission meeting, a more detailed budget report. So, and I think commissioners would be open to that and would want to see kind of more than what we've seen so far. So that would be one thing that I think this committee could provide. Some of the things we talked about before, in in May, I think we're like looking at chairs of committees and reviewing processes. I'm not sure where that is in terms of like priorities because especially with the audit. So I think I would want to prioritize supporting Dr. Coleman and looking at kind of the red things on the audit. But also in terms of our own commissions processes, so like our committees. I do think we're trying to work as a commission on getting our own kind of documentation and processes and having good information to share with new commissioners and things like that. Dr. Coleman has, I know, good ideas about like onboarding in the fall and, you know, different things like that. So I feel good about our own commission and how we're taking action towards that. But I think I would just want to support Dr. Coleman in terms of thinking about the audit and I love standard operating procedures. Just love them. So that's what I would say.
I have a question. What I would like to be able to present is a monthly financial statement, which is standard in nonprofit organizations. I understand for whatever reasons we haven't had them. And what I am anticipating including is the budgeted amount, the actual amount spent, the year to date, and the variance. Is there anything else that we need to include?
Is that going to be in addition to this report?
Well, basically, this would be an extension of this report.
Got it.
What I proposed
Okay.
is
Because this report meets, I think, our needs. The variance is not quite clear because you can have variance in terms, you've got the difference, but the variance tells you whether you're at 60%, 70%, or you're at 2%. That really does tell you something in terms of it's not going to be done until January, so we're always going to be at 0% for the next 4 months, if you know what I'm saying. It gives us a guide to understand what that means. I like that. In addition to something like this is coming out of finance, I'm assuming.
yeah. This is what Chris presented to the staff last week at the staff meeting because I said we need to assume responsibility for managing. Now, what I am concerned about is, and I need to get with her and probably Amanda, how we the 3.247 for grants, we've got to include that as well.
Yes, Commissioner.
On previous, and I know it's different, and I just don't know what, in terms of Metro, what kind of reports or reporting is available, but every month we would see like a profit and loss statement and a balance sheet, right? And I know it's different, but just those 2 pages were very helpful. I don't know if they're able to run something similar or whatever. This, I think, is helpful. I do think are there kind of monthly updates? I guess that's kind of the profit and loss statement, but.
This is similar to a state-run piece, and what it does is it adjusts. So where you see the 352,600, based on the date that this comes in, if there's actual spends, that's where you see it. Profit and loss is sort of interesting in government agencies because I used to get money 3 or 4 times throughout the year. So there would be nothing on the federal spend until like September, maybe October. But then the state budget would come in on July 1 automatically. And then we get grants in. So that's what you're looking at. That's similar to the profit and loss stuff. It can be adjusted maybe to fit this.
I just think it's also kind of, I learned a lot from those profit and loss statements, seeing like monthly cycles of spending, like in terms of what, you saw each month, kind of the detail. And that was helpful for me to understand just in terms of the organization, right, what was going on.
And I think some of it here on the actual spend.
Okay, yeah.
But the variance is not on here, which shows the percentage of spending. So sometimes you'd see 0 on a column, and there's an explanation for that, which after you get an understanding and orientation to the form, I think that does it for you. It's not called profit and loss in government.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not
But it
familiar with that in government.
But it looks like it's the same items.
Yeah, the same.
It's the same items.
Yeah.
And the operating, I'm just looking at operating because the budget, the actual spend, and the difference though in dollars is there, but not the variance. Because I used to see variance. So if I'm 135% of spending on an item, that would be the first thing my commissioners would ask me, why are you that high up? Usually can be explained, but and that I think is what I hear you saying. That gives you the kind of the look.
Yeah, just really, it's just like the monthly views,
Yes,
right?
that's right.
As comparison, whatever
I
that
thought-
looks like.
That was my first question, was where the month to dates. Yeah. So I think that's what it is. So okay, wonderful. So that picture-
what I'm hearing is we want to include the budgeted amount. We want to include the amount actually spent. We want to include the year-to-date expenditure. We want the difference, and then we want a variance or an explanation.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay.
Yes. Because that'll give us all the variables that most people are looking for. And if there's anything else unusual, just an explanation of what's unusual, So, yeah, okay.
Really quick, Chris said that 3.2 isn't ours. We are aware of that.
It's what now?
The 3.2 isn't ours just yet.
We understand that. That's
Okay.
why we said it's not on there.
Okay.
But we're trying to figure out when it gets on there. Because at some point, even if it's not ours, it needs to be shown that it hasn't been allocated, but it's coming. Because that gives us a notice of what's happening monthly. So.
Did she say anything about the additional 200, 215? Okay.
She's on here. It's just we disconnected a few times.
Okay.
So I didn't say anything.
Okay, we'll
Okay.
follow up.
Yeah. And the 215 is for the disparity study? Okay. Let me ask a question. This is probably to legal, not more than anyone else. And maybe MHRC. Because this is real critical for what we have to do. Is the disparity study necessary before we do grant activity for Thrive or anything moving forward?
So legal has previously opined that the disparity study is highly recommended if you want to take certain factors into account for grant applications and grant allocations.
In other words, it is what we need to do to satisfy the original Croson decision at the Supreme Court level that says if you are, then you must have a study that justifies that. Is that what you're saying? I'm sorry, Tessa.
So legal has recommended, as we have with procurement, that to implement certain programs, such as we have with procurement, which is small business entrepreneurship, veteran, women-owned, minority-owned businesses. If we parallel that to the grants world, which is, possibly preference points on applications for certain races, certain genders, ethnicities, that a disparity study would be the best basis for that, because in the long run, should that be open to legal scrutiny, the Supreme Court and other courts have laid out guidelines for that.
Has anyone looked at the current, there's a case that probably is on the docket for October, maybe, I don't know that they've not started accepting, I don't think, that may impact grants out of Atlanta? Has anyone looked at that?
Are you speaking for SCOTUS, for the Supreme Court? I have not, but if that's something that you would like legal to look at and get back to you on, I'm more than willing to do that.
Yeah, it's I've got to figure out what it is. It's running through the courts, and it's on appeal, I believe, up to the Supreme Court. I don't know if we don't know whether they'll accept it or not, because that won't be done until October. But it involves grants to women business owners for technical assistance, I believe, and I can't remember the name, but I'll see what I can find for you. Because it impacts what we're talking about, since this is a grant program, so. Okay, so legal is recommending highly that we have this study before we do, if we're going to use certain criteria.
Depending on the policy of the commission going forward with
Got it.
grants.
Okay, got it, okay. Good deal. Yes, sir. I hear you.
I'll just keep thinking.
Okay, all right.
And again, as I've told Commissioner Juster and I've talked to Ms. Davis about, obviously legal is here to review any grant plans going forward, any policies that the commission might want to go forward with. So that's what we're here to do.
I forgot to mention this, but last time we met, you asked me to talk about that letter I wrote about the boards and commissions, just ideas that I had. I just wanted to mention that we got that survey from, so I just wanted to mention that from the about boards and commissions, because there's a committee. I know Ashley's on that committee too. And so I just wanted to mention that on the record and hope that people will do the survey.
I've done the survey. I also indicated that some of them were not good yes/no questions because you didn't ask me my opinion. Because SOPs are about process and things of that sort, and yes/no sometimes works, but I did note that for some of them. I can't remember which questions, but I did note that. But I made a note that I was willing to discuss if they would just call me or send another survey, because I think there's a lot of process in Metro, and the question is, where's the best process for us to look at for Metro internally, and then where's the best process externally? For internal, HR, finance, some other things, they probably are things that can also be adjusted pretty quickly, depending on where we are and what's going on or not going on. And I think I've talked to you, heard that from you as well as others. It's there. It's a matter of different communicating systems, I think, exist for HR and some things like that. So, okay.
Also finding them. They may exist, but
Oh, okay. Okay.
I was just looking at some of the things from the last meeting, to your point about things that come next, and one thing was rule definitions and training programs for commissioners and staff, which Dr. Coleman's already working on that and thinking about, like, commissioner training and things like that. I think most of the rest of the stuff comes under the audit as well. Like, it seems to align with those kinds of action items. So I would just reiterate that if we want to be tasked with anything or given assignments, or I would be happy to do anything like that to support that process.
Commissioner West, or Chair West. Watts, not West, sorry. My apologies.
Wrong W.
As it pertains to the disparity study, I think that the Grants and Funding Committee should probably take up whether or not it's possible for us to grant money in an equitable manner without using some of the criteria that got us into the Title VI complaint hot water previously. I would like to say, though, as we're trying to potentially mirror other cities that have done it well. Sydney just looked this up, and Austin has done 2 disparity studies, one in 2014, one in 2020. 2022. So I think it might be worth doing a little more research around that and finding out how they've utilized that as well.
I think that would be great, just to sort of research what they're doing, sort of outline it, and may be able to outline it, if we're doing a study, what that might look like moving forward. And that's before the Supreme Court decision, but it's still okay, because if they looked at the factors, they're back to Croson, basically.
Yeah, and I mean, the money's been allocated. I imagine it would be very difficult to allocate it anywhere else now. And so since we have it, we should figure out how to best utilize it in terms of that study.
Okay, good deal. Then we'll note that Commissioner Jester and his committee is going to look at those issues around disparity studies. So that in Austin in particular. So that'll help clarify what they did, what they've done. It just gives us a view, and doesn't mean we take it, but it means we take it under advisement and move forward. Wonderful, wonderful. Is there any one thing that you'd just like to rush out and do, Commissioner Lefowitz? Because I know you like to gather data.
Just tell me what to do, and I'll be happy to.
I know that Executive Committee is looking at bylaws, but we started talking about bylaws before, and I asked Commissioner Nefflin to look at those. Then the others were the charters for individual committees, and I know that you're on CARE, because I watched the CARE committee yesterday, by the way, and that you all are talking about defining equity and some other things. So I think as we look at charters for committees, that's one thing that as commissioners, if we're on those committees, to look at and sort of figure out and sort of bring back to this body.
So I'm happy to get with the chairs of the committees, and I have the charters, and I could send them and kind of facilitate that.
Okay. Would you send me those charters as well? And then I'll just want to see them, see what they look like, because that works out as well in terms of where things are.
Those are on the shared drive, right? Okay.
I'm not a share drive girl, I hate to tell you. You do share drive. I don't. Thank you for sending them to me. Okay, good deal. And then I think the other thing is perhaps to hear from Public Arts about their process, their procedures at our next meeting, since in fact they have their contracts and we get that, but it's still something to know because because that needs to be out there and people need to understand that yes, we do have certain things. And then the question becomes maybe, is there any way to use any of the things there? Well, the process there that might get us where we need to be ultimately. I don't know. I'm just throwing out questions for us to
I think
consider.
it's very valid.
Yes, okay.
Connection to make.
And then if there's HR policy or things that are going, HR policy, I think that would be good to know what they are.
Now,
And
regarding what?
HR in terms of how arts functions and operates. Okay. And is it standard with the form HR department? What does that look like? How do people do this, that? You got timesheet. We don't need to know the details. You got timesheet issues outlined, other things, due dates, etc. They're all in place. Some stuff, all of that goes into a standard operating procedure. So that's what we're looking for. So public arts and HR. Finance is the other piece, but that's the budget. So that's some things there as well in terms of reporting. And then we've got the audit issues, and those are pretty clear and defined. And once we approve those tomorrow, I think we can probably look to see what needs to be done there and see what we do. Legal, would you have a problem if once we approve it to do assignments out to individuals to do some research from this committee and come back to the full body? Just assignments.
Through Dr. Coleman?
Yes.
That's fine.
Okay, good deal. And it might not be all of them, but it might be some. So we'll look and see because you've got things that are important to do initially, and we want you to drive this in terms of what you need to meet right away, how we can be helpful in doing that. But these would be the three things there. So we'll do that.
Now, when you said three things, what did you mean?
The Public Arts Committee function for in terms of Commissioner Campbell West is on this commission. If she were here today, we'd probably just talk and then do that, but have her to come and talk with staff about what that looks like, what work that entails, so we get an understanding of what work art staff is doing as well. All right, and that we look at HR policy because some of that's might be in place, and that after the audit is approved, we'll talk about assignments.
Okay, but so you didn't have finance and budget as a separate thing.
Finance and budget is a separate thing, but we talked about the budget and what it needs to look like for reporting.
So that's all right.
So I think that's okay for now, unless there's something else.
Okay.
Okay?
That's why I was mixed up about the three.
Yes.
Now I got it.
Okay. And then after the audit, I'll work through you to see about if there's some assignments that you need right away to come back so we can start talking about what you have, what you don't have, where there's voids, and where there's necessary research to make sure that we're doing what we do to move forward. Finally, what I'd like for everybody to do is to perhaps look at those things that we want to do and we're not sure we can do. Which means that's sort of I know there's a talk about a retreat and some other things later on. As we move through the process, what do we want this to look like when we're finished? Is start looking at the bigger picture. And in terms of what we want it to do. I think we want ease, we want simplicity, and we want transparency so that people know what it is we're doing and how we're doing it. But to sort of look at and craft our own kind of process. What do we want it to look like, you know?
And as part of the idea with this, Commissioner Watt, do you think that, like, this is an ad hoc committee? I don't know how long those things go on, but I think there was some discussion when this committee was formed, right, that perhaps it would morph into a budget committee? Yeah. And so at some point, is that what might happen? And then how would that change the charge of the committee and things like that?
It seems to me that this committee should work itself out of a job, and then the budget goes to the executive committee. So
I tend to agree with you. Problem with that. I tend to agree because I think we're doing this because we had so much stuff to look at and do and so many issues that we did this. I would tend to think that somewhere in January we might be a committee looking at where are we and what value do we add to anybody moving forward and sort of take our own temperature to see if we need to continue to exist, and if so, in what form, and when we envision we need to turn things over to other committees, whatever that looks like. Does that make sense? Okay. So, and I think that's an ongoing process that we look at and sort of try to figure out how we make that fit, how we make that work. All right. All right. What else? Our next meeting is what date? We have meetings set. But do we need to wait until that next meeting, or do we need to meet before that? I think that really is my question. The next date is
August the 6th.
okay.
I feel like we should be fine. That's pretty close.
Yeah, that was because we were set for July 2nd. Yeah.
Well, maybe we should just keep it.
I think we probably should just keep it because Thursday, if we've got enough things to do with the items, the budget, the reporting, some other things that we could have a pretty robust meeting. Might not have to be 2 hours, but at some point we could do that and look and see where we are.
And I would say that would be the first meeting of the month for Arts Commission of August. Then there's public art, then grants, then right now commission.
Okay.
I'm waiting on dates for care, but
Sorry about that.
but yeah.
Okay.
Is that good?
Yeah. So if we could get an update on budget reporting, if we could have public arts come and talk with us, if you could provide us some oversight about what's going on with HR things and functions, and if there's one item from Thursday that we need to do for you to start it moving, so we can get you on target for Tennessee Arts Commission and or the audit. What is it? And we can talk about that after Thursday's meeting, and you can go out to whoever and see what we do, assuming everything is taken care of that day.
have you and Commissioner Nefflin been working on potential changes or looking at the bylaws?
He's not been at a meeting.
The executive committee is actually looking, as Dr. Coleman said, at the bylaws. And
Oh, I think I missed
I
that.
know that I mentioned last night that Commissioner Nephlin had taken a look for this committee, so I'm going to pull his comments from that for the executive committee.
Wonderful.
And then, so we're going to take a look at the bylaws.
Okay. And I think all committees would probably take a look and feed back into executive committee then, so that that process is in place.
For bylaws?
For bylaws.
Yeah, she's going to mention
Yes.
tomorrow, I think, to
Wonderful.
request feedback, even from individual commissioners, to come, yeah.
Because I think that's it. And then charters, you're working on that for us, so that's another piece of that. Okay, wonderful.
What's charters? I'm sorry.
Of all the committees.
Oh, okay.
Of all the
Okay.
committees, whether it's care, public arts, and then at some point, the question becomes, is there a committee, or was there a committee for advocacy? Was there a committee for Thrive? And if not, where does it fit? Is grant making is Thrive only? Why wasn't everything else on? What's missing? So if you're telling me that we're handing out money to different organizations, I think at some point we need to know which organizations are getting what money when, and that also needs to come back to the commission and to at least this committee initially to see where we're headed. Okay, even if we turn it back over to. Because is there somebody that tells us what happens every year in terms of other grant making?
I don't know. I do know that
I'm sorry.
grants is called grants and funding, and so that's why Thrive.
Everything falls under grants and funding. Because the only thing I've heard about grants is Thrive.
That's because it's been the most problematic.
I know, but that's my point, is that that's fine, but we need to make sure that it is.
don't forget the other.
We don't forget the other pieces, because if we do, it looks as though we're not dealing with the other pieces. So, okay.
Yeah, it is not out of sight or out of mind.
Okay. I think my opinion is at some point, we probably need to start reporting on all of those, if they're working well and those kind of things, and we might have a partial or maybe a two-part on grants and funding report back to this body at some point in the future as to what's happening with the others, so we know that. Again, if there are standard operating procedures and they can be adjusted and adapted, we need to do that. And then look at the problem issues and those critical issues that also need review right away.
Okay, because right now, there are really no grants pending other than the 300 applications that we don't know what we're going to do with. So, that we have to make a decision about, okay? So, the whole process of criteria, reviewing, ranking, etc., is yet to be done. So the grant making process is on pause
For everybody?
for all grants that we have.
Okay.
And that's what we're saying, that the FY24 are essentially, I'm saying this caution, essentially completed, but there's some outliers.
Dr. Coleman, to answer from earlier, all of the operating from FY24 has been paid out, and there's only one Thrive recipient that has not been paid out, totaling in $6,500. Outside of that, the other 96 have been paid. So there's one person pending for FY24 outside of the muralist and the small and micros, which are completely separate.
So operating's been paid, one Thrive. Where do the muralists fit?
They're completely separate.
It's separate.
It's completely separate.
And that's
so.
also connected to the conciliated agreement.
Okay.
So, because at one time, somebody wanted to make the announcement and et cetera today, and that just wasn't going to work.
Okay.
Yeah, there were 76 operating, 96 Thrive, and we are pending one Thrive payment.
Okay. Good deal. These are the questions we get asked. How many people have you paid?
That's a great statement to be able to make.
That's a great statement. Wonderful. Thank you. All right. So, August 6th is our next meeting, and we'll have. I'll I'll give you an agenda probably within the next day or two, because I'm leaving town to Friday for a minute, coming right back, but I'm leaving town. And then I'll talk with you after the meeting on Thursday for any assignments we may need to have. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, and we're trying to, Vivi and I are working on a new minutes plan too, so I may try and send out a draft of just what we've talked about with the action items by the end of the week for us, so we'll have it.
Wonderful. All right. Because I have quite a few notes today, so I've got some things here too. So if you send it to me, I'll see.
And just a quick reminder, I will be out 3 days next week.
Okay.
So if I don't respond, it's because I'm not here.
Okay. That's why I'm going to try to get you an agenda. So you can at least have it ready to go when you come back. So how about that? Okay. All right. Any other business, old or new? Any other questions, comments? If not, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.